The pink hair tie was all Ana López had left of her sister. She kept it wrapped around her wrist like a talisman, the elastic stretched and faded from the desert sun, still holding a few strands of Lucia's dark hair. 3 years had passed since that morning in the New Mexico desert, when they'd separated the sisters into different vans. 3 years of searching, of dead ends, of nightmares where she heard Lucia calling her name across an impossible distance. The authorities told her to give up hope. The statistics were clear. Young girls who disappeared at border crossings rarely resurfaced. But Ana couldn't accept that her 15-year-old sister had simply vanished into America's shadows. Somewhere, Lucia was waiting to be found. Or at least, that's what Ana told herself during the endless nights cleaning office buildings in Albuquerque, saving every dollar for private investigators who found nothing but silence. The journey had started with such careful planning. Their mother had sold everything in El Salvador, the small house their father had built, her sewing machine, even her wedding dress. $12,000 for both daughters to reach Los Angeles, where their aunt waited with jobs and a spare room. The Coyotes had seemed professional, organized. They'd shown testimonials from successful crossings, phone numbers of people who'd made it safely. Everything had seemed legitimate until that final morning when the vans arrived. Ana remembered every detail of those 4 days walking through the Sonoran Desert, the weight of their backpacks, carefully packed with water and energy bars, the way Lucia had braided her hair tight against her scalp to keep it from tangling in the thorny bushes, the songs they'd whispered to each other during the endless nights, childhood lullabies their mother had sung before everything fell apart back home. The group had been larger at first, 23 people following 2 guides through paths worn by thousands of desperate feet. There were other families, other sisters and brothers, mothers with children, young men traveling alone. They'd moved only at night, hiding during the scorching days under camouflage tarps that made them invisible from Border Patrol helicopters. Lucia had been the youngest in the group, but she'd kept up without complaint. She'd always been tougher than her small frame suggested, hardened by years of helping their mother work after their father's death. At 15, she could already sew a perfect hem, cook for a dozen people, budget pennies into survival. The desert was just another challenge to overcome. On the second night, they'd lost 3 people. An older man's heart had given out in the brutal heat. His son and daughter-in-law had stayed with him, choosing family over dreams of America. The guides had barely paused, urging the rest forward. Time was everything in the desert. Stopped too long and everyone died. Ana had held Lucia closer after that, making sure they walked side by side, hands clasped when the terrain allowed. They'd share their water equally, ration their food together, took turns staying awake during rest periods to watch for snakes and scorpions. They were a unit, indivisible, just as they'd been since Lucia was born. The third day brought new horrors. Border Patrol helicopters had forced them to scatter, everyone running in different directions before regrouping hours later. 2 people never returned, a mother and her teenage son, probably caught or lost in confusion. The guide showed no emotion, just recalculated the route and pushed forward. By the 4th dawn, everyone was breaking down. Blisters had turned to open wounds. Water was running dangerously low. The strongest helped carry the backpacks of those who could barely walk. Ana had given her last energy bar to a pregnant woman who looked ready to collapse. Lucia had offered her water to a man whose bottle had leaked empty. Then they'd seen the vans. 2 white vehicles waiting at a predetermined coordinate, windows tinted black against the rising sun. The relief was overwhelming. They'd made it. The walking was over. America was just a drive away. People cried, embraced, thanked God for deliverance. The guide smiled for the first time, congratulating them on surviving the hardest part. That's when everything went wrong. The guide started dividing people between the 2 vans, but not by the groups they'd traveled with. Families were separated. The pregnant woman was sent to one van, her husband to another. When people protested, the guides explained it was for safety. Border Patrol looked for family groups traveling together. Better to split up for a few hours and reunite at the destination. When they tried to separate Ana and Lucia, Ana fought back. She grabbed her sister's hand, refused to let go. They couldn't separate sisters, she argued. They were all each other had. The guides grew impatient, then angry. Time was wasting. Border Patrol could appear any moment. Everyone needed to get in the vans now. One of the guides, a woman who'd barely spoken during the journey, took a softer approach. She explained that the second van was specially equipped for younger travelers, more comfortable seats, air conditioning that worked better, snacks and drinks. Lucia would be safer there with the other teenagers. They'd arrive at the same location in Phoenix within an hour of each other. It was just logistics, nothing more. Lucia had looked at Ana with those brave eyes she developed since their father died. She was 15, not a child. She could handle an hour apart if it meant they'd both be safer. She squeezed Ana's hand, whispered that everything would be okay, that she'd see her soon. Then she walked to the second van without looking back, her pink hair tie catching the morning light. Ana watched her sister climb inside, saw her take a seat by the window, press her palm against the glass in farewell. Then the van door closed, the engine started, and Lucia disappeared in a cloud of desert dust. It was 6:17 a.m. on July 18th, 2021. Ana would check that time obsessively for years to come, as if knowing the exact moment of separation might somehow undo it. Her own van ride was a blur of exhaustion and worry, packed with 12 other migrants. No air conditioning despite the promise, water bottles warm as blood. The driver said nothing, just followed dirt roads that seemed to lead deeper into nowhere. Ana kept asking about the other van, when they'd reunite. The driver ignored her, turned up the radio to drown out questions. They arrived at a drop house in Phoenix 8 hours later. It was nothing like promised. Not a nice neighborhood where they'd shower and rest, but a boarded-up building in an industrial area, windows covered with aluminum foil, the smell of too many bodies in too small a space. Ana searched frantically for Lucia among the faces already there, but found only strangers. The house operators claimed to know nothing about a second van. Maybe it went to a different location. Maybe it was delayed. These things happened. Be patient. But as hours turned to days with no word, Ana's panic grew into something darker. She demanded answers, threatened to leave and find her sister herself. That's when they showed their true nature. She wasn't going anywhere until her full fee was paid. Not the money already given, but an additional delivery charge of $3,000. Everyone in the house owed similar amounts. They were prisoners until family members sent payment. Ana begged them to at least confirm Lucia's location, to let her speak to her sister. They laughed. Once fees were paid, maybe they'd have information. Ana's aunt in Los Angeles scrambled to raise the money, borrowing from friends, maxing out credit cards. 3 days later, Ana was released onto a Phoenix street with nothing but the clothes she'd worn through the desert. No phone, no money, no information about Lucia. The drop house operators had given her a number to call about her sister, but it was disconnected. The police station was her first stop, but they showed little interest. A minor separated during a legal border crossing? It happened constantly. Without proof of kidnapping or trafficking, there was nothing to investigate. They took a report, added Lucia's name to databases already overflowing with the missing. They suggested Ana be grateful she'd made it safely herself. The Salvadoran consulate offered sympathy, but no solutions. They had no jurisdiction, no resources for searching. They gave her pamphlets about human trafficking, numbers for organizations that might help. Every call led to the same response. They were overwhelmed, underfunded, sorry, but unable to assist with individual cases. Ana's aunt drove from Los Angeles to collect her, but Ana refused to leave Phoenix. Lucia might be somewhere in the city, might escape, and need to find her. She got a job at a fast food restaurant, slept on the floor of a sympathetic co-worker's apartment, spent every free moment searching. She walked the streets, showing Lucia's photo to anyone who'd look. She visited every church, every community center, every place where migrants gathered. She learned about the networks that operated in Phoenix's shadows, the drop houses, the brothels, the factories that used undocumented labor. Each revelation made her more desperate to find her sister before something terrible happened. Months passed in a haze of searching and working. Ana's mother called daily from El Salvador, each conversation more heartbreaking than the last. How could she explain that America had swallowed Lucia whole. That all their sacrifice had led to this? Her mother aged years in those phone calls, voice growing thinner, hope fading to resignation. Other families in similar situations found each other, forming an informal network of the searching. They shared information, pooled resources for private investigators, held vigils for the disappeared. Ana met mothers who'd been looking for decades, fathers who spent everything on false leads. Their eyes held a specific kind of grief, not for the dead, but for the perpetually missing. One woman claimed to have seen a girl matching Lucia's description at a truck stop restaurant near Flagstaff. Ana drove there immediately, showed photos to everyone, waited for days in case Lucia returned. Nothing. Another tip placed her in a Los Angeles sweatshop. Ana traveled there, bribed a security guard for access, searched rows of bent backs for her sister's familiar posture. Another dead end. The private investigator Ana hired with 6 months of savings was more honest and helpful. He explained how the networks operated, how young girls were moved quickly, often multiple times, their identities erased and replaced. They could be anywhere in the country within days, working under assumed names, threatened into silence. Finding them required luck more than skill. Social media became Ana's obsession. She created accounts on every platform, posting Lucia's photo with hashtags in English and Spanish. She joined groups for missing migrants, trafficking survivors, anyone who might have information. Every notification brought hope and disappointment in equal measure. Scammers contacted her constantly, demanding money for information they didn't have. A year after separation, Ana moved to Albuquerque for better work. She needed money for the ongoing search, for the lawyers who might help adjust her status, so she could search more freely. She cleaned office buildings at night, attended English classes during the day, saved every penny that didn't go to basic survival. The nightmares were consistent and cruel. Always the same scene. Lucia in the van, palm pressed against glass, Ana letting her go. Sometimes she dreamed of finding her sister, only to wake to the familiar emptiness. Other times, Lucia appeared as she might look now, older, changed by whatever she'd endured. Those dreams were the worst, suggesting a future where they become strangers to each other. Ana learned about the economics of human trafficking from advocates and survivors, how young girls commanded high prices, how they were traded between organizations like commodities, how they were kept moving to prevent rescue, controlled through drugs and violence and threats against their families, how some were sold across borders, disappearing into international networks impossible to trace. She attended support groups for families of the missing, sharing her story until it became rote, mechanical. The details never change. The 4 days walking, the promise of special vans for younger travelers, the pink hair tie catching morning light. Other families nodded in recognition. Similar stories, different details, same devastating outcome. 2 years after losing Lucia, Ana received a call that temporarily shattered her rebuilt life. A girl had been found in a raid on a trafficking operation in Houston. Age and description roughly matched Lucia. Ana drove 17 hours straight, arriving at a detention center with hands shaking from exhaustion and caffeine. It wasn't her. The girl was Guatemalan, had been missing for 3 years, bore only superficial resemblance to Lucia. But seeing the reunion between that girl and her family broke something in Ana. The joy and relief on their faces was what she'd imagined for herself so many times. She sat in her car afterward and screamed until her throat was raw. The advocates warned her about burnout, about the danger of letting the search consume everything. Other searchers had destroyed their health, their sanity, their other relationships in pursuit of the missing. Some found their loved ones after decades, damaged beyond recognition. Others searched until they died, passing the burden to the next generation. Ana tried to build a life while searching. She dated a man who understood her obsession, who helped search on weekends, who didn't complain when she woke crying Lucia's name. But eventually, even he reached his limit. He wanted a future, children, a partner who was fully present. Ana couldn't give him that. Part of her would always be in that desert, watching a van drive away. The false sightings continued. Lucia working at a nail salon in Denver. Lucia seen at a bus station in Dallas. Lucia rescued from a raid in Chicago, but disappeared before authorities could process her. Each lead cost money to investigate, time away from work. Pieces of hope that shattered on impact with reality. But Ana couldn't stop following them. What if the next one was real? She hired a second private investigator who specialized in trafficking cases. He was more pessimistic than the first, explaining that 3 years was an eternity in trafficking time. Girls were moved internationally, sold to operations in other countries where U.S. investigators had no reach. Or worse, and he said this gently, they didn't survive the life they'd been forced into. The desert crossing was sometimes the least dangerous part of their journey. Ana refused to consider that possibility. Lucia was alive somewhere, had to be. The alternative meant all of this. The searching, the hoping, the empty years was pointless. She clung to stories of miraculous reunions, families reunited after decades apart. If it could happen for others, it could happen for them. The pink hair tie finally broke one morning as Ana was getting ready for work. The elastic, stretched beyond endurance, simply snapped. She held the broken pieces and wept like she hadn't since those first days in Phoenix. It felt like losing Lucia all over again, like the last physical connection had severed. She bought a small locket, placed the broken hair tie inside with the only photo she had of them together, taken days before they left El Salvador, both smiling despite the fear. She wore it constantly, a weight against her chest that reminded her why she couldn't give up. Lucia would never give up on her. The searching was both burden and duty, love transformed into action. 3 years became 4, then 5. Ana's English improved. She got better jobs, saved more money, hired better investigators. She learned to navigate American systems, understood her rights, built networks of allies. She became an advocate herself, helping other families navigate the early days of searching, sharing what she'd learned though it had yet to bring Lucia home. The calls from her mother came less frequently. The cost of hope had broken her health, left her bedridden and bitter. She blamed Ana for agreeing to separate, for not fighting harder, for failing to find Lucia. The accusation stung because Ana blamed herself too. Every decision that morning haunted her. What if she refused? What if she'd insisted they stay together? What if other members of their desert crossing group occasionally surfaced in Ana's life? The pregnant woman had delivered safely, named her daughter Hope. The man Lucia had shared water with sent money every Christmas, a debt he insisted on repaying. They formed a loose community of survivors, bound by those 4 days and what came after. None had seen the second van arrive anywhere. Ana learned that the guides from their crossing had been arrested a year later. Different names, but the same operation, still separating families, still using the promise of special vehicles for the vulnerable. During questioning, they admitted to selling young girls and women to trafficking networks, claiming it was just business, nothing personal. They got 15 years in federal prison. It wasn't enough. The prosecutor had asked Ana to testify, hoping her story might add years to their sentences. She'd agreed immediately, thinking it might lead to information about Lucia. But the guides claimed ignorance about specific victims, said they just delivered packages without tracking where they went. The second van driver was never identified, probably back in Mexico or operating under another identity. Sometimes Ana wondered if Lucia was searching for her too. Did her sister have access to computers, to phones? Did she remember Ana's phone number, their aunt's address? Or had trauma and time erased those details? The not knowing was its own torture, imagination filling the silence with scenarios each worse than the last. She moved apartments frequently, always leaving forwarding addresses in case Lucia somehow tried to find her. She kept the same phone number despite the expense, terrified of missing the call that might come. Every unknown number set her heart racing. Every young woman glimpsed from behind made her stop and stare. The advocates introduced her to a woman who'd been trafficked at 15, escaped at 21. She was Salvadoran too, taken in similar circumstances. She spoke carefully about her years in captivity, the multiple times she'd been sold, the city she'd passed through like a ghost. She'd tried to escape twice, been caught and punished. The third time had succeeded only because a client had taken pity and helped her. What struck Ana most was how the woman spoke about identity, how she'd been given new names, new histories, forced to become different people until she'd almost forgotten who she'd been, how the first thing she'd done after escape was call her family, only to find they'd moved, changed numbers, given up hope. It had taken 2 more years to find them, to prove she was who she claimed to be. This gave Ana new nightmares and new hope simultaneously. Maybe Lucia was free, but couldn't find her way back. Maybe she was looking in El Salvador while Ana searched in America. She hired an investigator there too, someone to check if Lucia had somehow returned home. Another expense, another dead end, another small erosion of possibility. 5 years after the separation, Ana became a citizen. The lawyer had argued her case based on her cooperation with trafficking investigations, her work with victim advocacy groups. The ceremony felt hollow. She wanted to share this moment with Lucia, had imagined them taking the oath together. Instead, she stood alone among strangers, reciting words about a country that had taken her sister as its price of admission. With her new status came new possibilities for searching. She could travel freely, access databases previously closed to her. She hired a 4th investigator, one with law enforcement connections. He found records of dozens of Jane Does who might have been Lucia, young women arrested for prostitution, drug possession, immigration violations. Each record required follow-up, usually leading nowhere. One Jane Doe in Minnesota caught her attention. Right age, right height, arrested for shoplifting, and gave no name, no history. Ana flew there immediately, convinced this was finally it. The woman in custody was Salvadoran, traumatized, refused to speak. But when Ana was finally allowed to see her, the recognition she'd expected didn't come. It was just another lost girl, another family's tragedy. They stared at each other across the visiting room glass. 2 sisters missing sisters. Ana's work in advocacy expanded. She testified before Congress about family separations, spoke at conferences about the missing. She became a voice for the voiceless, though the voice she most wanted to hear remained silent. Politicians use her story for their agendas, promised resources that never materialized. The missing remained missing. Sometimes she imagined giving up, moving somewhere new, building a life unencumbered by the search. She could marry, have children, create a future instead of living in an endless, awful present. But then she'd remember Lucia's face that morning, the trust in her eyes as she walked to the second van. How could she abandon that trust now? The pink hair tie in its locket had darkened with age, the strands of hair brittle and fading. Ana had it tested for DNA, creating a profile that could be matched if Lucia was ever found. The technology gave her new hope. Databases were improving, connections being made that were impossible before. Science might succeed where human effort had failed. She met other sisters of the missing at conferences and support groups. They shared a specific kind of guilt, a particular grief. Sisters were supposed to protect each other, to never let go. The failure felt personal in ways that defied explanation. They formed their own support network, understanding each other's obsession in ways even parents of the missing couldn't quite grasp. 6 years passed, then 7. Ana was 32 now. Lucia would be 22. Sometimes Ana studied age progression photos that showed how her sister might look now, but they seemed like science fiction, bearing no resemblance to the girl she remembered. Would she even recognize Lucia if she saw her? Would Lucia recognize her? The phone call came on an ordinary Tuesday, while Ana was preparing for a night shift. Unknown number, Las Vegas area code. She almost didn't answer, tired of scammers and false leads. But habit made her pick up, say hello in a voice already resigned to disappointment. The woman on the other end spoke carefully, said she ran a shelter for trafficking survivors, said a young woman had come in last week, badly beaten, refusing to give her real name. But she'd mentioned a sister named Ana, had asked if someone was still looking for her. She was Salvadoran, early 20s, had a story about walking to the desert and getting in a van. Ana drove through the night, 18 hours of desert highway blurring past. She stopped only for gas, afraid that any delay might let Lucia disappear again. The shelter was in a rough part of Las Vegas, unmarked for safety. The woman who'd called met her at the door, warned her to prepare herself. The young woman inside was fragile, traumatized, might not be who Ana hoped. She was led to a small room where someone sat hunched in a chair, facing away. Thin shoulders, dark hair chopped short and dyed blonde. Ana's heart stopped again. She said her sister's name, barely a whisper. The figure turned slowly, as if afraid of what she might see. It was her. Changed, damaged, but unmistakably Lucia. The same eyes, though they held 7 years of horror. The same hands, though they trembled now. The same sister, though she flinched when Ana moved toward her. They stared at each other across an impossible distance. Two people who become strangers while remaining family. Lucia spoke first, voice different than Ana remembered, rougher, careful. She asked if their mother was alive, if Ana had really been looking all this time. She apologized to get in the van, for trusting the woman guide, for not being stronger. She tried to escape so many times, been sold and resold, moved across the country like cargo. She'd almost forgotten her real name, her real life, until a beating had broken something loose, and she'd remembered Ana. The reunion Ana had imagined thousands of times was nothing like reality. There was joy, yes, but buried under layers of trauma, guilt, and strangeness. They couldn't just pick up where they'd left off. Too much had happened. Too much time had passed. They were sisters still, but sisters who'd have to learn each other again, slowly, carefully, with professional help. The story Lucia eventually told, in fragments over months of therapy, was both unique and terribly common. The second van had driven straight to a warehouse where girls were sorted like packages. The young and pretty to one buyer, others to another. She'd been sold to a trafficking ring that moved her every few months. Las Vegas, Portland, Chicago, Miami. New names, new horrors, new reasons to forget who she'd been. The woman guide who promised safety had been part of it from the beginning, earning bonuses for delivering young girls. The whole desert crossing had been a selection process, for days to identify the most vulnerable, the most valuable. Families were separated deliberately, the young taken while others were delivered just close enough to safety to avoid suspicion. Ana took leave from work to stay with Lucia at the shelter. They spent days sitting together, not always talking, just existing in the same space. Slowly, carefully, they began building new memories to overlay the old. Lucia remembered the songs they'd sung in the desert. Ana still had photos from their childhood. Piece by piece, they reconstructed their sisterhood. The legal process was complex. Lucia had been arrested multiple times under different names, had no documents proving her identity. Ana's citizenship helped, as did the DNA test, the testimony of trafficking experts. Slowly, bureaucracy ground toward recognition that Lucia was a victim, not a criminal. She was granted AT visa, temporary permission to remain, while assisting prosecution of her traffickers. Some of those who'd held Lucia were arrested. Others remained shadows. She could identify faces, but not always names, locations, but not addresses. The networks adapted quickly, abandoned operations, started new ones. The second van driver was never found. The woman guide had disappeared, probably working the same horrible trade under a different identity. Their mother's joy at hearing Lucia's voice turned to grief when she understood what her daughter had endured. The weekly calls became exercises in careful communication, avoiding topics that trigger breakdowns. The reunion they'd all imagined, a return to El Salvador, a family restored, seemed impossible now. Lucia couldn't handle the questions, the stares, the well-meaning sympathy that felt like judgment. Instead, the sisters built a new life in Las Vegas. Ana found work there, rented a 2-bedroom apartment where Lucia could have her own space. Therapy 3 times a week, support groups, careful routines that provided structure. Bad days when Lucia couldn't leave her room, better days when she smiled at Ana's jokes. Progress measured in tiny victories. Cooking a meal together, watching a movie without flashbacks, sleeping through the night. The pink hair tie remained in Ana's locket, no longer needed as a talisman, but kept as a reminder of the morning they'd separated. Yes, but also of their survival. They'd both endured 7 years of different hells. They'd found each other against impossible odds. That had to mean something, had to point toward a future where healing was possible. Other families in the network of searchers reached out when they heard about the reunion. Ana tried to give them hope while being honest about the challenges. Finding was only the first step. The person who returned might be deeply changed. Reunion was not a Hollywood ending, but the beginning of a different, difficult journey. Still, it was better than the not knowing, the endless searching, the questions without answers. Lucia occasionally spoke at trafficking awareness events, though it exhausted her. She wanted her story to prevent others from trusting separations, from believing promises about special vehicles for the vulnerable. She wanted that woman guide's face known, wanted families to understand that separation meant sale, not safety. Her voice shook during these talks, but she persisted. The sisters marked each anniversary of their reunion, not their separation. Forward, not backward. Lucia was learning to drive, talking about getting her GED, imagining a future that had once seemed impossible. Ana was learning to be present, to stop searching for someone who was already found. They were both learning that survival took many forms, that love could endure even 7 years of darkness. Sometimes Lucia asked about those 4 days in the desert, needing to reconstruct memories that trauma had fractured. Ana told her about the songs they'd sung, the stars they'd named, the moment they'd first seen the vans and thought they were saved. She didn't talk about letting go of Lucia's hand, about watching the van disappear. That memory belonged to Ana alone, a weight she'd carry forever. The searching network Ana had built evolved into something larger, a database of the missing, resources for families, connections between survivors and those still looking. Technology made possible what had once required luck. Faces could be matched across years and distances. Stories could be connected. The missing could sometimes be found. Not all stories ended like theirs. Most didn't. The desert and the vans and the networks swallowed people who never surfaced. But Ana and Lucia's reunion gave others permission to keep hoping, keep searching, keep believing that love could outlast whatever darkness followed that separation. It wasn't a happy ending. Too much had been lost for that. But it was an ending, and in the world of perpetually missing, that itself was a miracle. Late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, the sisters sometimes sat together in their small living room. They didn't always talk. Sometimes just being in the same space was enough. Proof that the vans hadn't won. That family could survive even 7 years of searching and suffering. They were different people now than they'd been that morning in the desert, but they were still sisters. That was what mattered. That was what lasted. That was what made all those years of looking worth the pain. The second van had taken Lucia away, but Ana had brought her back through sheer force of will and love. The pink hair tie had broken, but their bond had held. They'd walked through different deserts for 7 years, but somehow, impossibly, they'd found their way back to each other, in a world that specialized in separating families, that felt like its own quiet revolution.